firstly, let me say thank you so much for coming, everyone. Thank you, Arno, for making this possible for me. And thank you for all of you who've traveled miles and miles to get here. I'm really amazed that you all made the effort. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Armen Aroyan, who's sitting right at the back, who was one of the people who was instrumental in my research for this book, because he was able to show me the actual land of our ancestors in encyclopedic detail. So anyway, I'd like to tell you first of all why I wrote these books, and then I'd like to explain what the books are about and do a little reading from each of them. So as Armenians and non-Armenians all over the world, you cannot have failed to hear about the Armenian genocide in the last 4 or 5 years. The build-up to the centennial commemorations in 2018, 2015, and the weekly announcements that this country or that country had recognized the Armenian genocide became part of our daily news intake. And yet, as even the word Armenia became current and coupled with the word genocide, conjured up visions of violence and atrocities which took place long ago, I could not help but think of the parallels which were being played out on our TV screens on a daily basis in our own contemporary world. In Syria and Yemen, in parts of Africa and Asia, the waves of refugees washing up on European shores today look similarly desperate to those in black and white film footage from 100 years ago. Many years ago, as a young girl, the tragic story of the Armenian genocide and the displacement of our people was vividly brought to my attention, where it took up permanent residence in my mind's eye. It was told to me by my maternal grandmother, who left her homeland soon after the Hamidian massacres, during which her father was beheaded. Her family dispersed all over the world soon after. My grandmother had grown up far away from the land of her birth. She had married into a family of what I can only describe as fedai in exile. It was she who instilled in me that although those events had occurred long ago, we should know about them, and we should certainly not forget them. For otherwise, how could we explain why we had no country of our own and why we were living where we were? The Soviet Socialist Republic of Armenia was a long way away from our homelands in Anatolia and Cilicia, and in any case, it was not open to visitors. I had started to put down many times a family history. I had made no headway and thought I would never complete anything at all. And then one day, a boy's voice spoke to me, or rather I went to my desk and I wrote as a boy. I discovered that I could better say what I wanted as fiction, or faction I suppose, than as a straight memoir. And so I began to write In the Shadow of the Sultan. At the time, the centennial was a couple of years away. I realized that Armenian children and teenagers were being exposed to this part of their history without much reference to the whom, what, where, and why, but only to the fact of the occurrence. Not all go to Armenian schools, and for the most part, the Western press was remarkably ill-informed on the subject, certainly in Europe, I think, in the UK. Likewise, many non-Armenians who were interested, but perhaps did not want to trawl through the standard histories of the subject, might want a simple and, dare I say it, more digestible way of learning the whys and wherefores. So I wrote something which could awaken sympathy among the young, as well as the general reader. I wrote about a boy caught up in the episode of our history, the Hamidian massacres, which I believe was when the seeds of genocide were sown by the Ottoman Empire, to be acted on with full murderous intent 19 years later. I wanted to talk about the normality of lives, of the culture of the people, and what it could possibly be like to be cast out of a comfortable existence on one's own as a young teenager. And I realized then that the story should have a sequel. So in my new book, The Darker Shadow, I explore these ideas further. I have a girl character as well as a boy to give a view of life during those days from both a male and female perspective. The story will unfold further in the third part of the trilogy. There are some questions that people put to me when they know that I have written these books. So the first one is, where is Armenia? Which is simple. Are you sure that Armenians did not massacre Turks? Is another. Because actually Turks are masters at fabricating alternative truth, as we know. And one of the other questions which I am asked is, why can't you forgive and forget and just move on? Well, I have to answer this in a sort of diplomatic way, because I don't want to demonize absolutely everyone. I say I cannot move on because of the denial which has been a policy of modern Turkey since its inception in the 1920s. Because of this denial, our nation has become a poor supplicant in other countries, having to prove that the worst calamity that can befall a nation fell upon it. Because Armenians are ridiculed even now and accused of having invented such a thing for gain. Because there are some people who would have us believe that Armenians should be ashamed to have brought this state of affairs upon themselves. And only this week, Mr. Yildirim, the Prime Minister of Turkey, was saying how this didn't happen and that it was impossible to have proper relations with Armenia because of this. I well remember my grandmother's generation, and indeed those who had survived 1915 and their children, being reticent to talk about it. It was something to turn away from. They were made to feel as pariahs in their ancestral lands and beggars abroad. This denial and silence caused many to give up their Armenianness. But the hurt does not go away, and the past cannot be so easily erased. Luckily, we are a resilient enough people who have millennia of experience in building a successful and thriving national life, wherever we are welcomed and given shelter. We have done well as a kind of floating nation. We do not and should not forget our own history, language, and culture just because someone else said so.